Okay, so Larry just asked us over here, question over here. He wanted to know that, so this week's Torah portion is called Parshas Terumah. Um, so what it ultimately is doing is when we get to see the beginning of the building of the tabernacle. Okay, also the Mishkan, which ultimately became the Beit HaMikdash, the Beis HaMikdash, and right on Temple Mount. But that's what ultimately, came about. So it says that God's presence settled upon the ark. So Larry was wondering, like, where exactly was this God's presence, right? What's going on? So first of all, there was an aspect of God filling up, like, so to speak, like we would call the tabernacle like the physical manifestation of God's presence in this world. Okay, that's like the way to express it. Obviously, you can't slap five with God, and you can't touch God, but in that same physical sense, but there's some aspect of a presence of God, right? That does exist, or that we can feel if we're in tune enough, or we're in the right space, or whatever it might be, we're there spiritually, connected in that, and remove a lot of the distractions and clear away the clutter and remove the spiritual blockages and impurities that we have, and get to that space, when you go into the Arizal Mechma, you go, oh my God, right? So like you could feel God right then, but that's a different type of experience, right? So where's God's presence? So God's presence, it's settled, it would seem to be, the Gemara, the Talmud talks about how God, kind of settled by that ark, or by the cherubs. But ultimately, really, the two cherubs, right, which were like these angel-like, what to call it, structures, okay, that were upon the Holy Ark, upon the Aron HaKodesh, and one represented God, right, and one represented us. So you'd find it in different positions. They're hugging each other, facing each other. These were different types of things where you would see this physical manifestation of God's presence. How are we doing? Are we doing well as a people? Are we not? We're not doing so well as a people, and that could be somewhat expressed through those keruvim and through that sense of the feeling that we had by the ark. So certainly that spot in between there is really where it would be. Did it really fill inside the ark? Inside the ark itself, there were things inside the ark. It wasn't an empty box, or empty boxes, which maybe we'll talk a little bit about tonight as we try to connect ourselves a little bit to Purim. But this was definitely, my understanding of it. I have to look back at that Talmud in Tractate Barachot that talks about learning, and also Tractate Sukkah, where it talks about learning certain lessons from, where's God's presence would land, or would stay within. It was, within 10 amos, or within 10 tfachim of the ground. God was above 10 cubits from the ground, and this gets into more measurements that were involved with the size and those kinds of things. But that is kind of where that presence would ultimately be felt the most. But it did fill up the room, so really no one was allowed to go in there except for the Kohen, on the high priest, on Yom Kippur. Otherwise, there was no going in there. They talk about how there was any sort of maintenance that was ever done in there, and how they did that. That the Mishnah talks more about how they would pull that off, because you can't really go in the room. So how do you pull that off? Can't step in the room, so they would lower them in. But that's something for a different time's discussion. But that's my understanding of it, Larry. If that's somewhat of a decent answer.
Sure.
Right. But I did want to use. I was thinking. So the holiday of Purim is coming up, and actually today is what we call Rosh Chodesh Adar. And I wasn't sure how much time you would have between now and the actual holiday of Purim with our schedules and how that all would work out. Purim is on the evening of March 2nd, going into March 3rd. So we'll meet this week, and then God willing, we should be able to meet next week also. Yeah, we should be able to get one more in before Purim. So I thought we could start talking about Purim, kind of to whet the palate, and to get us thinking about it, right? Especially, we say, one of my favorite concepts, and I've for sure shared this in the past with you, but I think it's important to think about it. There's actually talked about in Jewish law and halacha. They talk about a concept called Misha Nichnas Adar Marbin B'Simcha. It's actually a fun song. If you look it up on the YouTube, you'll find all kinds of fun songs called Misha Nichnas Adar. When the month of Adar enters, right? Marbin B'Simcha. You're supposed to increase your joy. Right, and there's a fun song. Misha, 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 Nichnas Adar. People get all into it. Our students in the yeshiva here, they dressed up the whole building, and they took one of my car that didn't pass inspection. They spray painted, graffitied it, and Purim 2026, and there's all kinds of fun shtick going on, and people are starting to get into Purim mode. But there's an idea that when we come into the month of Adar, we're supposed to increase our joy. And when we enter into the month of Av, right, which is the saddest month of the Jewish year, right, Tisha B'Av, right, when you enter into the month of Av, we are mema'atin b'simcha. We decrease our level of joy. I always like to say, I'm not sure who I heard this from. I don't know, maybe Rabbi Twersky, Rabbi Dr. Twersky would be the type to say this thing. I don't know. But what that tells us, if there could be such a concept of increased joy and decreased joy, that means the default setting of a person is supposed to be joy, simcha, happiness. That's the default setting, right? You want to know what the factory, the factory settings, right? You want to reset the factory settings. The factory setting for us is joy, is simcha. I think it's an important thing to think about, right? Very often, I think in our world we get confused. We think like the default setting is like depression or distress or stress, right? Or insanity, or like, oh my God, right? Like that seems to be like the default setting. And if we feel like we're not there, so we have this month to help us try to get back there, right? We increase our joy. We try to do things that seem to be on the outside. And this is what I want to talk about tonight. A little bit about this to get the Purim started for us. And then I want to start thinking about some questions, things we want to answer, ideas we want to talk about for the holiday of Purim. Maybe I'll throw that out there first. I have one topic I want to talk about. Why don't we throw a few questions out there if you have some things you want to explore? Maybe we'll get to it tonight. Maybe we won't get to it tonight. Maybe as a curveball thrown at you and you weren't ready for it and you'd like to go ahead and have a week to think about it. But any particular questions or things, topics, aspects of the holiday of Purim you would like to discuss? I'm not trying to distract us from talking about the Mishkan, the tabernacle. We could talk about that too, the Torah portion. I'll connect the two, don't worry, hopefully, if we have enough time. But anything particular that comes to mind when you think about the holiday of Purim, think about the story of Purim, whatever it might be. There's a lot to think about, a lot to contemplate on.
Rabbi, is it a spiritual joy that we're aiming for, or is it just just I don't know, taking a walk and getting the endorphins cracking and and getting a good sweat on, get the Spartan workout on and and just enjoying yourself that way. I mean, what.
Well, the short answer to that is, my ultimate answer to that always is, which we could talk about, it is part of the theme of Purim, is exactly this exact question that Larry's asking is part of what Purim is all about. In Judaism, the answer to that is both. Because in Judaism, we do both. We are physical beings, and therefore, right, you can't separate the two. And it impacts where we're at in a mindset, emotional, right, physical joy place, impacts our spiritual joy, impacts who we are, where we're at. Can we connect? They talk about, the Torah tells us that when the years that Yaakov didn't know where Yosef was, or he understood that Yosef had been killed, or he knew something happened to Joseph, right? So Yaakov went into a place of a little bit of darkness. And during that time, he did not talk to God. Meaning he was able to daven and those kinds of things. But Hashem, he did the divine inspiration and that regular type of connection that Jacob had with God was not there because he was in a place of darkness. So they're inseparable. You can't separate the two. Right, which is why we should be doing, right, the things that we need to do physically, emotionally, right, so that we can be in an appropriate state, so we can connect to our Judaism, connect to ourselves, connect to God, right? Connect to our fellow man in a better way. I'll tell you right now, I'm really, a lot going on physically, been challenging, and I'm not in the physical shape I need to be, and it's really impacting my life in my spiritual endeavors, my physical endeavors, and how effective I am, how, with the quality of my work, the quality of my mind, like it's really impacting me, and I know that, okay, we're going through a stage over here. We're going to, move into the house and start to settle in a little more, and, a lot going on. So it really impacts me, sometimes it helps me pray better, but sometimes it challenges my ability to pray clearly. If that makes sense. So I think we can't separate them. And that's exactly what I wanted to talk about tonight. Part of what I wanted to talk about. Any other thoughts before we jump a little deeper into this topic that Larry brought up? We're not going to tackle the whole topic tonight. There's no way, Larry.
I'd say your feeling of not optimal physical is across all of us here in the winter. So, that is normal, and it's definitely recognizing that, okay, I can't. I need more energy, and I need to get ready for spring and get physically ready, and that is normal.
Yeah, but usually this is when I'm actually
even here in our fake winters.
Yep.
But for me, with my journey, exercise wise, health wise, like the winter's actually been a great time for me. I love working out during the winter. I did those blizzard blasts and whatever that I started off that whole workout Spartan journey with. I love it. I love putting on my winter gear and going for a crisp, freezing cold run. I mean, I love it, but I'm not in that space. It's and just where we feel like we're the Jews in the wandering desert a little bit, we're in transition, and that's what it's supposed to be right now. And ultimately we'll get, we know we're one chapter at a time, space at a time. And that's how we get there. And, that's also the story of the Jewish people. It's the story of Purim, right? One of the beauties of the story of Purim is it's the ultimate story of faith and recognizing what we call HP, higher power, hashgacha pratis, right? God controls everything that happens in the world. Everything happens for a reason and a purpose. And we don't always see it. It's sometimes very hard for us to see. Right? Purim is all about hiding behind the mask, right? Because the Purim story took place over the course of about 12 years. We condensed it and get to see the whole story take place in, a 45-minute reading of the book of Esther. And we get to see the cause and effect. This happened, which leads to that, which led to that. And ultimately, Esther, nice Jewish girl, taken by this, Persian grubby king, and, who knows what he did to her, and right, seems to be the worst thing ever, but that was actually the setup, right? It was a setup for our salvation. And we don't always get to see that in our stories, in the Jewish story, right? Right now, we got a long list of things that seem to be a lot of Esther kidnaps, right? Haman wants to kill us. Right. So we feel a lot of that right now in the world, and we're waiting, and we know because of the book of Esther, because of the Purim episode and experience, we know that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We know there's going to be a Mordechai and an Esther that are going to ultimately bring about a salvation that's going to ultimately bring to a Darius that's going to lead to the Jewish people going back to the land of Israel and rebuilding the second temple. We know in our episode that we're living now that there's going to be a something that's going to push it over the top, and we're going to get to the ultimate redemption. We're going to have a third temple, whatever it might be that's going to ultimately push it, that we're going to have the new Darius, Daryavesh, that's going to lead us to say, you know what, Jews, go back to your land, build that temple, right? Let's get the world back to where it needs to be, where it's supposed to be. Everybody can finally recognize God is the ultimate one, and he runs everything, and he wants to bring all the blessing and goodness into the world, and we just have to open ourselves up and let it in, right? So we recognize that, we know that, but it comes from the darkness that was the Persian exile. those 70 years of the Jews have been exiled from the land of Israel, right? Off to Persia, right? And then ultimately, after 70 years, going back and building the second temple, right? So we get to see that in this small Megillah, this small letter, right? So that's kind of what part of what Purim's about, the strength that Purim can give us, right? That's what it does for us. And that's just a little sliver of just one component of what Purim is ultimately about, right? We can't quite see it. There's so much masks hiding behind this, behind the curtains, and what's going to be there, and the puppetry that's happening up in heavens to control the things down here, to set things in motion, to set us up for success. But that's what the Purim story is about. It's a celebration of what we're experiencing right now, and a celebration of understanding and strengthening ourselves to know that, no, this is like the Purim was. This is what the Jewish people experience. And we got this. We're going to be okay. Now, some sad things happen along the way. They do. And why that happens, every episode is for a person to try to understand, but ultimately understand that God's got a plan, right? But that's what Purim is about. That's a little bit of what Purim's about. And I think a lot of it also is about figuring out ultimately who we are, right? We talk about this idea of people dress up on the holiday of Purim, right? Dress up as kind of things are hidden, but dressing up is also this aspect of learning more about who we are. How do we deal with tough situations, right? Or when we're not quite ourselves, right? How do we get there? Can we figure out who we are? Do we do things on the outside, like we were saying before about the happiness, right? We do things on the outside to impact the inside. And our goal in life is to try to bridge that gap, right? Deep down inside, we have our neshama, we got our soul. And that's like, that really is like, that could be the best version of us. But what's happening on the outside isn't the same thing. We got this whole space of our physical existence to go ahead, and we got to bridge that and close that gap, so that ultimately what's on the inside is the same thing that's happening on the outside, which is really the lesson of the Holy Ark. The Holy Ark was comprised of 3 boxes: gold on the outside, gold on the inside, and a wooden box in the middle. That wooden box is us, right? Man is compared to a tree. That's like the life, right? Metals, they're not alive, but wood's alive. Wood has life to it, right? Wood has the ability, while it's connected to the ground, it grows, and then afterwards it's used to create more energy, because you got to use it to build, right? To make a fire, right? To create energy. That's life. Life is where we have deep down inside, we got our neshama, our soul, our gold. And we got to travel through life, through the wood. We got to travel through the wood of life to get ourselves to be the gold again, and to make that through and through. So it looks, it's a big gold box. And that's what we are. We got to experience life to go ahead and make the inside like the outside. Tocho Kabara, the inside like the outside. And that's a goal in life. To strive to be somebody who's through and through golden. What you see in that deep down inside is what you're seeing on the outside, is what we're giving over to the world. Our expression to the world is, guess what? We're godly, right? Godliness is amazing. It's great. And when we walk around the world, we are God's representatives around the world. I don't know if anyone's on Facebook or not. I have to see if it posted properly, but I was looking into this new program on Facebook called School, to see if it's another way to teach Torah or share Judaism with the world. And they had somebody as a commercial. They had somebody who was wearing a yarmulke, and just the comments, all the horrific comments, the anti-Semitic comments, and just one after another. But that doesn't really matter. What matters is this person going to be sharing light to dispel that darkness of all those comments that were written on this nice little ad? I on my little post about it, I put something and I challenged the community, of the school community. What do you like? if I join the school system, right, or this online program, is that what my world's going to look like? Am I going to be giving a Torah class like this, and then someone's going to jump in and spew their hatred? I'm not sharing anything that's hatred. I'm only sharing about people becoming their best self, ultimately trying to help the world become its best self. Right? There's no hatred of what we talk about. We only share about goodness and light and how we can make the world a better place. So that's what we try to share. That's what we try to do. That's what the Aron is all about. That's what godliness is all about. That's what Judaism is all about. That's what Purim is all about. Purim is an amazing holiday where we have the opportunity to focus on some of those pieces of trying to become our ultimate self. How do we get there? How do we do it? It's a very physical holiday. Eat, drink, be merry, give gifts out to friends, give money to people that need it. Very physical holiday. We talked about that idea in the past. So ultimately, we'll spend more time on Purim next week. I'm looking forward to having emails and questions and texts over the course of the week about what we should talk about next Wednesday, God willing. But until then, there's some food for thought. Let's strive to be an Aron HaKodesh. Let's strive to be, the Holy Ark. Let's strive to be a menorah. Let's strive to be a walking, talking temple, tabernacle that God could rest his presence upon us and upon the world. And if we just work on shining the light and sharing the light with the world, we're going to dispel the darkness. The hatred will go away. Haman and all of his descendants will just they'll disappear, and we're going to outshine them, and they're ultimately going to turn into goodness. And that's what we want to see. So, God willing, we should get to that point in life, and life, the world should get to that space. Everyone should have an amazing Shabbos, and let's start thinking about Purim so we can make it awesome. When the month of Adar comes in, we increase our joy. That default setting is joy. Let's get there. Let's take the walk we need to take to get there to be happy. Let's do something that makes us joyful, that makes us excited, and help us to connect to our ultimate selves, God willing. So have an amazing Shabbos.
Shabbat Shalom. Right.
Mm-hmm.